Hi, my name is Lynn Looney, and this is the companion video to the Watercolor Landscape Wet on Wet step by step. This is the materials list. In this here, my brushes, I got a mop, I got a chisel, I got a liner, I got a round, I got another chisel, watercolor pencil, toothbrush, and a little well-used tube of gouache, white gouache. These are the Grumbacher watercolors that I used. It's a fairly limited palette, and the phthalo blue was actually used with the burnt umber to make dark, and the cerulean was what was used in the sky. And there was a little bit of China white. Here's my palette. Warm colors on the right, cool colors on the left, and a bunch of mud in the middle that I like to use, and especially in this piece because there was a lot of earth tones involved. Also, I had an inexpensive set of watercolor pencils that I used to sketch in. Like I said, the gouache was used for highlighting and dry brushing onto the post in the barn roof, and the toothbrush was for splatters. Here's the finished piece and the thumbnail that I worked from. As I have said in previous ones, I can't stress enough how helpful thumbnails are. It's a great way of solving problems and getting familiar. This one, I did 5 different thumbnails, and this is actually going to show the process. Real time, this is actually speeded up. Real time, it was probably about 30 minutes long, so with 5 of them, it was 5 to 6 minutes on each one. And I'm working them not solely as one, but as you see, I'm working them all about the same time. I have a yellow watercolor pencil that I'm rough sketching my composition in. And then I'm laying in a little bit of color. The reason I did this, the last watercolor tutorial I did, I was doing thumbnails to try out different colors, particularly for the background. This time I'm using this process to decide how I'm going to teach this particular piece to my students for them to best understand it and follow along. So basically I did the same thing, I just did it over and over again. And I'm rotating these because I want them to dry in between these layers, because I've got a lot of yellow. I don't want it to bleed and blend with the blue because I don't want my sky green and I don't want my barn green. The reason I'm doing all 5 of them is to have a good selection, and I did choose one in the end that was going to be the one that I was going to follow. But it's a small round brush that I'm using mostly for this, and a round will hold a lot of pigment, a lot of water. And while I've got that on the brush, I'll probably switch to, yep, there we go, switching it to another one. The colors on this were mostly warm and muted. The yellow is lemon yellow and ochre, yellow ochre. And the sky blue is cerulean, maybe with a little bit of touch of burnt umber in there, just to knock it down a little bit so it's not quite so sweet. But this particular composition was to emphasize the use of white paper. So many times with my beginners, I see that they use too much water, they use too many colors, and they cover their area, their surface, too well, basically killing all their whites. So this whole series that I'm doing over at the Art Center this year is to emphasize the use of white paper. And this one is, if you know, I showed you what the finished piece looked like, so you could see there was a lot, 50 to 60% white paper in that finished product. These are Grumbacher colors, and I use a whole variety of watercolors, but these I happen to still have in the tray from the previous one. And the use of a watercolor pencil instead of graphite, if you've ever sketched in, you know you've got to either try and lift some of that graphite or you got to draw very lightly. The advantage of using the watercolor pencils is you begin to actually lay down the colors in the areas that you're going to be utilizing, and then when you hit it with water they bleed, and you've already got a hint of a color there. Some of my students are retirees who do a lot of traveling, and one of the things that they do is utilize small formats when they're on the road, when they're traveling, instead of hauling all the large paper and backing board and all that kind of stuff. And this can be, see this size right here, can be done in your lap or on a tabletop. And it's, you could sketch them all in with watercolor pencils, and then later you could sit down with the wet watercolors and just some water to activate the pencils and draw. So it's very easy and very portable to be able to sketch. I mean, everything involved with this could just go into a little bag in your purse or glove compartment. So here are the 5 watercolor thumbnails, and now I'm going to show how I stretched the paper for this one. The previous one we stretched watercolor paper on stretcher bars, wooden stretcher bars. This I have a backing board. Again, I soaked the paper in water for about 15 minutes. This is a 140-pound cold press, so it has some tooth to it. And then I'm laying it on the board, and I'm taking my stapler and I'm putting a few staples in each side, rotating it around, making sure it's nice and even. And then I go back and fill in where the staples are probably about an inch apart, and that way you don't have a scalloped edge when it dries. You don't have it pulling against the staples as much. And this is an 1/8 inch board. I really need a 1/4 inch board because my staples are 1/4 inch staples and they'll go through. So I'm lightly stapling this, and the staples are sticking up. Actually, that'll be easier when it comes time, when I'm finished with this, to be able to take the staples out. I'm reloading here, but I prepped about 5 of these boards for my class to share with a couple of folks, and so I did one right after another. And like I said, you staple it all the way around and you set it aside to dry. When it dries, it's nice and taut. It's not going to wrinkle, it's not going to buckle. And then after you see me doing this, I'm going to set this aside and it's going to come back dry. And then I will take some wide masking tape and put over the staples, partly to cushion it if my hand were to rest on the staples, and partly to delineate my size, my inner size of the watercolor. I actually did that with a watercolor pencil. There's my stapler, nice lightweight stapler, and these are 1/4 inch staples, or 5/16, I think. Now, the paper's dry. I've actually sketched on it a little bit with some yellow. I started and I thought, well, I need to go ahead and mark these off. So I've got my masking tape, and I'm running it on the outside edge of my penciled edge for my image area, which is 11 by 14. try and work in standard sizes. It's a bafflement to me why watercolor paper, tablets, and blocks don't come in standard sizes, but they don't. This was actually cut from a larger sheet, and then my drop-offs I like to use to do the thumbnails or to have a little scrap of paper to try out my colors on. So here's the finished piece and the masking tape, and now I want to talk about how to get your masking tape off. Not just this, but anytime you pull masking tape off, even if you're painting your bedroom and you masked off your baseboard, take the tape off away from your painted edge at a 45-degree angle. This is the tape pulling away at 45 degrees. And you can see the staple sticking up. I did this all the way around. You can see a faint hint of that pencil line. If I were to mat this, the pencil line would be hidden under a mat. Here's the finished piece in a little slow motion to show some of these areas. And I really like how the gouache or China white, I think it was all gouache actually, that I scraped over the fence post, the barn roof. When I delineated the tree, I used that liner brush, which has those really long bristles. You can get a nice long edge on it. And the paint, to do that, you need to work it really, really loose, really wet. But for the dry brush, you want it virtually dry. I actually was dipping straight out of the tube. I did not dilute that paint at all. And then with the tooth of the paper, when I drug it across, it made that nice texture. And that liner brush is great for grass and for the fence wire. So here are other posts and a subscribe button. Be sure and hit that bell so you get future notifications. Please check out my other videos, the short version, the long version, some of the other things. And by all means, please comment and let me know what you think or how I could improve. These are for you. Thank you.